Welcome to the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast, your guide to understanding how to get out of the Wall Street rat race and start your own mailbox money lifestyle. Now, don't let these handsome Southern draws fool you. These financial minds are teaching our country to enhance savings, increase cash flow, and create passive income, all without the help of Wall Street. Are you ready to break through? Now here are your hosts, Russ Morgan and Joey Murray.
Welcome. This is the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Your host, Joey, the Italian Stallion Murray, joined as always by Russ, the Idea Guy Morgan. Russ, I hope you have some ideas for us today. We're talking about investing in that next generation. I know last week you were just telling me how you're getting your girls to learn cash flow.
Yeah, I think we got to be able to teach. We have to pass along those values that we have. There's these core things that we believe, right? That
Absolutely.
As parents, Megan and I got to spend some time last week in Costa Rica. And in that time alone, we sat in the room and we started talking about what is it that we believe as a family? What is it that we would want to pass down? Not just the financial things, but what are those core values that the Morgans believe that we want to make sure our kids and hopefully our kids' kids would know and be able to implement as well.
Well, I mean, aren't the things that we believe the things that shape what we have anyway?
Yeah, for sure.
Like the end result is the asset or the financial tool or instrument that we use, but we only use those things because of what we believe.
Well,
It has to start with that.
I had an awesome conversation with a guy. I was over in Dallas last week or the week before, and we were talking about what is it that we really believe. And then now let's look at our calendars and see what we really believe is actually being played out. Because our calendars a lot of times will tell you what you really believe. It may not be the words that you say or the things that you write down. And it's that gap we live in. So I like that.
It doesn't lie.
Yeah,
if
you set these core values, set this mission for your family, what is it that you really envision your family being able to reach its maximum potential, whatever that looks like? And then look back, are we actually living that? Are we moving in that direction, or is it just talk?
Well, and that is the topic of our podcast today with Andrew Howell, the author of Entrusted. He's going to help us in this podcast to bring that dissonant relationship between what we believe and what we're actually doing, and bring those things actually closer together, that our family is more united in the transfer, not only of assets, but the knowledge and the belief systems that surround those assets.
No, I agree. I mean, a lot of times when people think estate planning, they think, oh, well, I'm not 75. I don't need to do this yet. Or, hey, I don't have $5 million or $50 million sitting in an account today, so I can wait on this. And I love his process on that is that it doesn't matter the amount of wealth. What is it that you want to pass along? Those core values can be written out. They don't have to be in all this legalese, didn't have to be formalized. Just you need to have a plan of action for your family, and the whole divide, dump, dissipate planning that exists in traditional estate planning is not something that resonates with me.
It's broken.
I don't like it. So I like his concept. So if you really want to leave a mark for the next generation, you want to be one of those families that is remembered for what you believe and all of the values that you have, not by how quickly we can give them money and how fast they can go spend it. Because
that's the reality.
Yeah, I mean, Warren Buffett had a quote out there that says you want to leave your kids enough money that they can do anything, but not so much that they'll do nothing. and I think that comes like we have this thought process. Well, I earned it. I didn't receive it. Right. I mean, I worked hard to get to what I have now, and I want my kids to work hard for what they have. And sometimes it comes along with, well, I'm not going to leave them anything then. And I don't think that's what we're after.
Yeah, those are two very bad extremes.
Yeah, I think there's some level in there of, if I provided teaching to my kids, I educated them on what we believe, and I give them the tools to be able to live that out, man, let our brains dream on what that possibility could
Imagine. Absolutely. I think you're going to love this interview with Andrew Howell, some of his unique methods, some of the tools and resources that he has available to you. Let's go ahead and jump straight into this interview with Andrew Howell. Have you ever had the thought, I really am not saving enough for the future? And at the same time, you're sitting down to write an enormous check to the IRS every single year for $100, $250, $500,000 in taxes? Guess what? We just found the money that you should be saving, and it's been under your nose the entire time. Go to freetaxwebinar.wealthwithoutwallstreet.com and learn how the wealthy are paying less in taxes. You can implement these strategies so that the next check you write will be to your financial future and not to the IRS. Welcome to the show, Andrew Howell. Man, we are so pumped to have you on the show today.
I'm so excited to be here, you guys. I really am. I appreciate it's an honor to talk with you.
So Andrew, we are so stoked up to hear more about the Entrusted process that you have put into writing here. You said in 2015, you wrote the book Entrusted. And but right out of the gate, just so people have an idea, what we're talking about here is a totally different mindset, a totally different way of thinking about the estate planning process. And you break it down, you say modern estate planning is broken. Why do you say
that? Broken is probably a strong word. Certainly out of date is the word that probably is better there. Of course, you write a book, you want it to be somewhat salacious, but out of date is certainly.
You don't have to back off of it, Andrew. You can just straight. Come on.
Well, the problem with it is this. Everybody's estate plan, of course, if they've done it, which 70% of the population doesn't do anyway, which means their state probate code is the one that governs their estate plan. But even if they've done it, they're using most typically forms prepared by an attorney. And these forms were developed 80, 90 years ago. And it was when that generation, right, the greatest generation or great, grandparents or whatever, as they were going through that era, they were dealing with true economic hardship, right? Great Depression. Yeah, and the Great Recession wasn't fun. We were all unhappy. The Great Depression, they weren't eating.
Right.
So when they came out of that, right, and you've got this growth in the economy and they were starting to amass wealth, well, that created comfort. My grandpa had this great saying that money isn't everything, but it sure quiets the nerves, right? So because of that, right, they saw that this money did have the ability to create that comfort. And mistakenly, they believed that the estate planning process should therefore be solely dedicated to the transfer of the most amount of financial wealth to the next generation. And that developed pretty recently. Again, 70, 80 years ago is not that long ago. But for the entire history before that, there was a completely different mindset, and it was much more family focused in terms of families identifying who they are, what are their core values, and of course, those values and stories that relate to that were told, around the campfire or whatever, people relating these and teaching them. But the whole point of it was to raise kids that were self-reliant and independent. And so what happened throughout the years is, you get into the baby boomer generation, and they experience arguably the most affluent time in American history. Well, they had the assets, and so they started to become a little bit less important. And then you get into the idea of social impact in the 60s and everything that went on there. And they started seeing it in a different way, where profit wasn't always good, and couldn't there be some sort of meeting of the minds? And that's where some of this entrusted stuff, we call it, but people have other names for it. It's not it's definitely catching on, but it's been around for a while. But that's where people said, hey, wait a minute, how can we structure our estates in such a way where we're creating impact? Now, what that caused is this really interesting dichotomy that came in, where people now have this idea that, hey, my kids didn't earn it. And if I give it to them, they're going to be these entitled brats. So I'm going to give it to a charity. And I'm going to give it to that charity because then that will have a great social impact. The problem with that thinking, in my mind, is the charity didn't earn it either. And not only that, the charity is going to manage it probably worse than your children would. I mean, the best ratio in terms of performances of 501c3s is about 60%, meaning 40% overhead. 40 cents of every dollar you give a charity goes to paying their overhead or salaries, and 60% might go to the charitable purpose. Well, isn't that funny that the federal estate tax right now is 40%? So it's just all of these things. And then, our generation, kind of Generation X or whatever you want to call it, we are now, and this generation is coming into the position of power, either within families or family-owned businesses. They're the new CEOs. They've taken over whatever it might be, and they want something completely different, right? We have seen throughout our past, I saw it personally with a very good friend of mine from college. We were fraternity brothers together. In fact, I was his big brother in our fraternity house. And please don't hold that against me, anybody. I'm a former fraternity guy, right? But look, when that guy was 18 years old, he came into an inheritance of $140 million. His family owned a large grocery chain, and that guy was a lot of fun to be around. I was 20 at the time and he was 18, and we went down to the Ferrari dealership here in Salt Lake, and he put his black American Express down on this Ferrari that we drove out on that day. And I'm 20 years old. I'm thinking this is the greatest thing in the world. Well, you look at that guy now, he's passed away. I used to say he was the unhappiest guy in the world, but he wound up getting an opiate addiction, and as he was coming down from that, he had a heart attack, dying alone with his 2 Rottweilers next to him. I mean, it was just, he never got married. He started a bunch of failed businesses. He didn't trust anybody because he really felt that everybody was out for his money. And they probably were, because that's what he put out there, right? He had the Ferraris and the flashy life. And so we have seen the problems with unharnessed wealth as it gets transferred, right? In our book, we talk about wealth being dynamite not being good or bad. It just is. Certainly can be used for good or bad, right? Building bombs and landmines, or building roads and tunnels. The question is, what are you going to do with that dynamite? And the thing that's common with financial wealth and dynamite is that it will make an impact. But what kind of an impact is it going to make? And what everybody's estate plan, or at least 90% of what I see today, is a family member at their death handing over that burning stick of dynamite to their children and hoping they don't blow themselves up. So that's why we kind of think it's broken today. And isn't there some other way to create a purpose, create a self-identity? In essence, what are we trying to build here? I mean, somebody comes into a typical estate planner's office, and the estate planner tells them, okay, you need, to build this house, what we need is 100 2x4s, a bunch of sheetrock, and it doesn't mean anything to the client. The client doesn't know what they're trying to build. They've got to understand what that legacy is going to look like and how are we going to get there. And then as you build somebody's estate plan, that needs to be paramount. That needs to be the North Star that we always thrive for. These are the family's goals. This is how the trust needs to read. This is how the family partnership needs to work. And that now makes every decision so much easier.
So, I mean, one of the things I think about is like the guy who inherits $140 million, that family is starting to think about this legacy. Now, they may have not done a great job and passed it down. And as you mentioned, that there was a ill road for someone who received lots of money. But for the person who's listening to this that doesn't have $140 million that's going to be passed down, maybe it's $1.4 million that's going to be passed down, or right now is working, has a great business and has several kids and they love them and they want to do this stuff. But it's like, I got all these other things that are important. This is important. It's just not urgent. How do you talk to that family and apply these same entrusted concepts to them?
Well, I guess, Russ, what I would say to you, when you were 18 years old, what would you have done with 1.4 million? Now, I know you're the idea guy, so you probably would have done great things with it.
No, yeah, I mean, Ferrari wouldn't have been one of them because it'd been too hard for me to get in. But we would have definitely been at a dealership somewhere. We would have had a lot of fun. I like control too much to get into drugs, but we would have done a lot of other stuff. I can assure you.
I know for a fact what I would have done. I love to water ski, and so I would have been on my way down to buy a new Mastercraft. Now, I probably could have gotten one for about $30,000 or $40,000 back then. That is aging me because they're like $180,000 now, right? But I know exactly what. So the point here is what most people's estate plan is. And I don't think, 140 million, that's certainly where people have a lot of issues that we need to think about. But I don't think the overall principle here is different, right? I want my children to be self-sufficient and have a good quality of life and have meaning in their life. And really the only way to have meaning in your life is to be some kind of a producer. And people who just sit behind and don't do anything and sort of live off somebody else's money will never mean to you as much as the money you made yourself, right? We tell the story in our book of the gentleman who wanted to turn his businesses over to his son. And he was concerned about the son's responsibility level, so he decided to test him. And he said he had his son come into his office, and he said, look, I want to arrange my affairs to turn all of my businesses over to you, but I need you to prove yourself. And what I want you to do is go out and earn $10,000. So the son goes, oh, I could get $10,000 pretty easily. I'll just go to one of my dad's friends and borrow the $10,000 and create this agreement with him that then when I get control of the businesses, I'll pay him back, and I'll even pay him back double, $20,000. And he goes, and the friend sounds thinking, it's a great idea. Give him the $10,000. The kid comes marching into his dad's office, proudly hands him the stack of $10,000. The father immediately gets up, takes that wad of money and throws it in the fireplace. The money starts to burn. And the kid looks back at dad and he says, what are you doing? And the dad says, I know you didn't earn that money. You go out and make $10,000, bring it back to me, and then we'll talk about me turning these businesses over to you. So he thought that his dad's friend sold him out. So he decides, okay, well, I need to be a little bit more incognito about this. I'll go to one of my friends and I'll get him to loan me some money, and I'll give him $30,000. Pay him back. So he goes to the friend loans him the $10,000. He goes to the dad's office. He hands him the wad of cash. Dad walks over to the fireplace, throws it immediately in the fireplace, starts to burn up. The son says again, Dad, what are you doing? He said, you didn't earn that money. You go out, you make $10,000, you bring it back and we'll talk. So the kid thought, look, I'm never going to outsmart dad. And so he went out. He did it, mowed lawns, whatever he had to do, came up with the $10,000. Blood, sweat, toil, you got it. He walks in his dad's office. He hands him this wad of dirty money. The dad walks over to the fireplace, throws it in. The kid immediately jumps the money and pulls it out of the fire and stamps out the flames. And the dad looked at him and he said, I know you made that money, right? It's not worth it to you as much as if you make it yourself. And so I think we all want that for our children. We want self-reliant children. And I don't think that is different if I have $1 million in the bank or I have $100 million in the bank. Now, certainly the way that you get there is going to be a different path and other things that you need to take into consideration for economy of scale. But this is where estate planning is going. It just is. I mean, this is the demand that we are getting from clients, where they come in and you try to explain them the old typical, dump, divide, and dissipate approach, where you die and you now divide it 3 ways amongst your kids. And then when they turn 25 years old, it's all turned over to them. They say, hey, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There was this great article that came out, and I forget what magazine, where it talked about when true adulthood actually begins these days. And I believe it said that it didn't even start occurring in women until the age of 25, which means it probably never occurs in men at all. But the idea is, with that old kind of plan, which is always typical at 25, 30, and 35, we're going to see outright distributions. I mean, in and of that self, that creates problems with now including the assets in the child's estate, making it available to creditors. So I think that these concepts that we're talking about here apply across the board. It just depends upon how they're implemented based upon the family specifics. And that's the other problem with how estate planning is broken. It's all static. It looks the same, right? Your estate planning looks the exact same as your neighbor's does. I mean, with certain exceptions, of course, names and birth dates have been changed. But other than that, they look the same. And look, your family is not the same as your neighbor's family. And every family is just losing the power of that family history, where the past and prior generations really focused on family history. It's almost gone these days. I mean, everybody's on their iPad. You're not having conversations anymore. And these are just ways to start that conversation.
Well, and that's so important, Andrew. What you've really discovered and what you've really uncovered in your book is that it's no longer just a linear asset transfer function. Estate planning is not just an asset transfer, but it's more values-based. It's more passing on the wealth that is not just physical in nature, but it's the
Human capital.
values of that family. And you outlined that there's 7 disciplines of entrusted planning, and I want us to kind of walk through those, even if we can, just quickly, because I want people to start to hear what the differences are between what they may have always thought about estate planning to what you've uncovered in this book, because it was really impactful for me as we read through it. So let's kind of walk through that real quick, if you don't mind.
Happy
The
to.
first one you said, or Russ, you may have it here, is that entrusted families know who they are and what they believe. So walk me through just a brief synopsis of what you mean by that.
Well, this is all about kind of that developing the core value, the philosophy, the family mission statement, the purpose, right? What are we here for? What makes, in my case, the Howell family unique? This is where you do the discovery, like with the rivets of deciding each person's core values and all of those types of things. And again, it's to get us to that North Star. What are we trying to build here? And when we say successful families, again, in writing the book, what we were doing is we were looking at these 7 things that we see pretty common. Now, not all of them are common or are present in these families that have successfully navigated this wealth transfer issue, meaning they don't have those trust fund babies, or what we call trustafarians in their lives. And we have identified those principles that I really do see those in there. And the first one, I think, is the hardest one for people to get started on. Right? You capture the core values, the life lessons, the principles of a family. The family and mission statement is developed. I know you mentioned another book that is similar along these lines, where they refer to this as a family constitution. Now, a family constitution is a great way to think about it, except for I think of it a little differently. This is, in my mind, more of the family Declaration of Independence. Because when I think of Constitution, I immediately go to the U.S. Constitution. But the U.S. Constitution is the what. Right? This is what's going to be done.
Right.
And I think of this a little bit differently. Right? The Declaration of Independence was the why. Right? Why are we creating a new country? Well, we think all people are created equal, and we want no taxation without representation. And these are the ideals of what we're trying to build. And then the Constitution was used to kind of work into those ideals. So in my mind, this is more of the family Declaration of Independence. Why are we no longer going to do it the way that we've been doing it in the past? And what does the future hold, and how are we going to get there, and what ideals are we trying to develop?
So
does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And then you're in that chapter on those core values and what families believe and who they are. You list out, I believe it's 44, correct me if I'm wrong on that, differing core values, and you have a game that you guys have created called Riveted, which is a card game, which I'm really excited to get and to play within our family to see what my kids think are their core values, whether it's honesty or artistry or whatever it may be. Which I started looking through those, and leadership and productivity and some of those things I started leaning toward. Humor, as I make fun of Joey on a regular basis, I think I possess a lot of. Empathy is not one of them.
You'd have to be funny for humor to be one of your values, bro. Come on.
But to me, that was really interesting as I read through your book, and I looked at those different values, and I thought of, if I was going to build this estate plan, what I want to have, what I want to leave when I'm no longer here, it should be based upon what does our family believe, mission statement, vision statement, but what are the core values that make us who we are? Because this is, like you said, this is why we're doing this. This is the whole purpose behind it. Did it take you a while to come up with that concept? Where did that come from?
So what happened, it was really kind of a natural outgrowth when we wrote the book, and we talked about, and it was really this first chapter on families identifying who they are. We got a lot of responses that, yeah, it's great, we like that idea, but how the heck do we do it, right?
How do you get started? So, yeah.
Exactly. How do we begin this discussion with our family? Because again, you find a lot of families that don't have these discussions. I mean, certainly older generations were very close-lipped. They didn't talk about anything at all. In fact, this is an interesting thing. Another ancillary benefit of bringing the whole family together and having things very open, as opposed to having kind of that closed mentality where we hope the kids don't find out we've got a bunch of money in the bank. And the way that we're going to prove that is my wife and I will sit in first class, but we'll make the kids sit and coach on our way to Hawaii. And that way we'll teach them and they have some sort of a need to. It's just crazy. But we think that you've got to open up the books, and you've got to be, at least now to a certain extent, you've got to do it in age appropriate ways, because we wrote an article for Trust and Estates magazine, which in our world is kind of our peer reviewed deal. It's got to be annotated and it's kind of nice to get accepted. But it was in March of 2017, and we called the article Grats versus Gratitude. And grats in our world is a tool that we use to transfer wealth from one generation. So the point was, are you wanting to transfer wealth, or are you wanting to transfer gratitude? And we looked at all of the things that had gone on within families that we had represented. And what did we find common in terms of family harmony existing after somebody's estate is sort of finalized? Because we have this saying in the estate planning world that you never truly know a person until you share an inheritance with them. I mean, I have seen the best families really decide to roll up their sleeves and go to battle over it. And so what we found is that in families that were open, I mean, you basically took two families as similar as they could possibly be, and one family was really open about what everybody could expect, about 85% of the time, that family was still in harmony a year later. Whereas families that were really closed, it was like 46% of the time they were in harmony. So including the family in terms of deciding who that family is highly important. I mean, as the matriarch and patriarch of the family, you need to lead that discussion, but you've got to include the other members or it's going to fail. So yeah, that led us into, okay, well, how do we get this conversation going with the kids? And that's when we developed Rivets, and that's the card game. And like you said, it's got these 44, what we call positive values, because there's certainly negative values, but these are the positive ones. Yeah. And you basically play it as a family. And what you wind up with, like in my case, I would have my 5 core values. My wife would have her 5 core values. Each of our kids would have their 5 core values. And we get to go around the table and kind of talk about why those are our core values. And that, that's because what we found is our core values are completely dependent upon our life experiences. That's how we develop our core values. And like early on in my life, I had somebody who was really dishonest with me. So as a result, one of my core values is honesty. And I just know that every positive relationship that I have has to have honesty at its core value. And it's just a sensitivity to me. But that now allows me to explain that experience that I had to my children, hopefully teaching them more about who I am and where I'm coming from, but also hopefully educating them on not making that mistake. I mean, I want my kids to make mistakes. That's the way people learn. But I don't want them to all make the same mistake I did. And I certainly don't want them to make the same mistakes as each other. So the family talking about these things, it's the way to start the dialogue. And then the family as a whole gets together and creates their 5 core values. What are the family's 5 core values that they really want to strive after? And now we have a place to start, right? We have that North Star when we're developing estate planning. We know what we're trying to build. And it could be that one of their core values is not to pass the most amount of money onto the next generation. Maybe they have a philanthropic side where they want to do something, but they want to create an impact in some way. And there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that. I don't need to tell you guys, that's your world. But it's just a completely different way to think about it. And so then that led us into writing our second book, which came out in September, called Riveted. And that's where we go through each one of these 44 core values and get into them a little bit deeper. We tell a story from history of somebody that you might not expect. We tried to pick interesting people to exemplify each one of these levels or each of these values. So that's sort of what had developed just in that chapter 1, and families really discovering who they are. That's led us into developing a whole process. We have online diagnostic tools. Families can go through it. We have a facilitator, she'll help you play the game and talk about the core values and help facilitate that discussion. It's really neat to see the impact it's made.
Well, I think what you said there, and I kind of resonated with, and Joey and I have talked about this on the podcast a lot, is getting our children involved, getting our families involved in discussions on finance. We talk a lot about doing family lending. And some people kind of frown upon that because they're like, oh no, I'll never do that. You don't ever want to get the family involved in things.
Right.
It's like, what? Like the more we are involved with our families, the better, not the worse, right? But what you're saying too, it kind of leads into the second discipline is where you say trusted families prepare the family for wealth and not simply just that financial wealth for the family. And it comes with that preparation. If you own a business, right, you got to prepare the kids for what's going to come. What are some other things that people can do to prepare their family, not just simply for the wealth of the money, but also kind of what's going to happen throughout that process?
Yeah, so we think that a couple of core principles come into play here. First of all, education is always an important one. Now, I mean education, not just in its traditional sense, but in a much broader sense. Because traditional education, right? You send your kids to elementary school, they're not going to teach you anything about financial literacy or anything like that, and values, or at least I hope my school is not teaching my kids about values. That would really bother me. Reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? That's what I wanted to stick to. But education,
stick to that,
and there's a lot of actually resources, and we have a number of different resources throughout the country that offer that financial literacy to children in education. In fact, there's a great group out in California that will take children as young as 5 in an age-appropriate way, start introducing them to some of the concepts. We think leadership is a really important thing. There are leadership programs. I have yet to find a successful family that hasn't shown that next generation, and business succession is a big one. We'll talk about that in just a minute, but at least encouraging that next generation to be leaders in the industry, right? That was Mayer Rothschild, where he sent his five sons out to various hubs within Europe to become leaders within the financial industry. And then they just all shared the information between them. So they knew what was going on. We're able to build just incredible wealth. So it's all about, again, leadership as well. Then, like we were talking earlier, clear expectations need to be set, right? Everybody needs to know who's playing the game here and who's the decision maker. And when I say include the kids, I don't mean that they get to drive the train, right? Mom and dad are still in charge, but they need to set those expectations. Where do you have input and where you don't? Because otherwise kids can come in and feel like they're just beating their heads against the wall because everything they're trying to contribute isn't getting listened to. So as long as we have those clear expectations set, and again, in appropriate ways, we also feel you've really got to respect the individual. Families sometimes, and in my mind, this is sort of this issue of principles versus preferences, and not elevating preferences to principles. Let me give you an example. A principle in our mind is sort of a universal truth, right? It's something that we'd probably all agree that we would like to have happen. Preference is sort of the way that we get there, right? For example, a lot of my clients want to have in their planning documents that they'll pay for college and schooling, universities, and so forth. And even some will say that my kids don't have any control over what I might leave them until they have graduated, say from college or something like that. Now, I know what's going on there. They're saying, okay, education is important for you to be able to make a living and to be self-reliant. But that's the principle, right? Self-reliance. The preference for how you got there was through this education. But is that up to the parents to decide? Because Bill Gates and Steve Jobs would never have met these parents' expectations, right? So in my mind, what we do in terms of preparing the family for the wealth is respecting each person's individual sort of principles. What are they wanting to get for? And allowing them to have a little bit of flexibility on how they get there. The other thing that is important, I think, in setting expectations is to decide how that family really views things. Do we view things in our family as wanting to create equality of outcome, meaning that our kids are going to be just as successful as each other when all is said and done, or are we creating equality of opportunity? And I'm such more of a fan of thinking it through about equality of opportunity, because each of my kids are going to take different life paths. My oldest, he's 13, Thomas, this kid loves to be outdoors. We have a small ranch up in Montana. I love to fly fish. I love to bow hunt. This kid has caught the bug, and he never wants to be inside. So you can imagine how fun school is for us. But if this kid tries to go to law school or medical school or something, I'm going to slap him upside the head. It's going to ruin his spirit. I want him to go join the Forest Service, live his life under blue skies instead of fluorescent lights like his dad, and have a great time doing that. But if he chooses that life path, he can choose anything he wants, just like his brother and his sister, but he has to be willing to accept those consequences. And just because my other son, Harrison, who is either going to be in prison or running a Fortune 500 company, if he decides to take that, second route and he's worth a lot of money, well, we all have the same opportunity. And that's a hard thing to come to grips to, because you always see as time goes by, oh, I've got to do more for that child because they're just not performing. So again, expectations is a big one.
So, Andrew, this has been an incredible introduction to Entrusted planning. I don't think we're going to have time to buzz through all 7 of these.
I warned you guys. I told you I like to talk.
Well, I mean, the key is here, we want to make sure we sell enough of your books, right? I mean, we want the kid to be able to live outside and keep going to that ranch, right? So dad's got to sell some books and everything else. And I think it's good, though, that, that we've touched on, to me, some of the biggest points there. What is the why? How do we prepare our kids to get involved in these sort of things? So, from your perspective as an attorney, you've been doing this for 19 years now. And when you're sitting down with the family, what's the end game? Like, what do you hope to accomplish through those meetings with them? Because a lot of times people have never been in that meeting. They don't even know what to expect from an attorney's perspective. I want to end there, because a lot of times the fear of what they don't know prevents people from taking action.
Absolutely.
Help them understand. Again, maybe they don't call you, maybe they call a family attorney here or whatever. They just read your book and they apply it. I know we've talked in the kind of pre-show, and you were really gracious with, like, I'm not doing this to get the legal work. What can you do or share with our audience to help them prepare for what a meeting like that should look like, so that the way they're not fearful of the unknown?
Yeah, so there's kind of 2 things that we feel like we do. We obviously are lawyers, and still we're practicing law and strictly in the estate planning world. And our firm, which is now at 17 lawyers, we have 8 lawyers that just do tax and estate planning work. 3 of them have their master's degree in tax, one from Georgetown, one from Northwestern, one from UNLV. So we've got a lot of depth when it comes to the planning side. And I think that from a legal perspective, clients should not be worried about going in and meeting. What I do, and what I would hope most of my colleagues do, is you just sit down and get to know each other, because there's a lot of great estate planning lawyers throughout the country, but you want to make sure you have that personality fit with whoever you're working with, because these relationships, and this is one of the reasons that I love what I do, what's unique about the estate planning relationship with a client or a family is that it goes on for years, right? I have a tendency to represent clients for a long time, and I learn a lot about them. So I really want to put that investment in getting to know them and whether or not it's a good fit and us working together. And then we sort of look at their planning depending upon the issues going on. Or if there's a lot of issues, we look at it like an elephant. And the way you eat an elephant is just one bite at a time. And so we kind of look at the things that are missing, right? We do absolutely think that sort of the will where you're providing guardianship for kids, and the trust where you're avoiding probate and making sure the assets go in trust for the benefit of your kids, not to them outright at 18, the power of attorney documents where you're giving the spouse the right to make your healthcare and financial decisions, the medical directive where you're telling the rest of the world when to pull the plug if you're on life support. These are all very important documents for you to have. So typically we would start out with that. And as part of that discussion, we would start the family thinking about this idea of core values. I always bring it up in my introductory. Now, I'll tell you this, there are a lot of clients that think that these are pie in the sky, lofty ideals, and I don't want to do any of that. Just give it to them all when I die. I don't care. I have some people saying, I don't care if they have to go through probate, right? What's their problem? I've done enough for them. And with that, you can't do a whole lot, but if they're willing to at least talk about it, then we introduce it and we kind of have them start thinking through it. I like to have sort of that foundational protection planning in place, just because I have this recurring nightmare that a client's going to pass away before it getting signed, and now they're going back through probate and nothing's going to work. And then that gives us a little breathing room to be able to identify what those core values are, and that's our second side of things. And this is what you were talking about before. Oftentimes clients will have that already done, their basic planning. And we certainly don't expect to capture all legal work, nor do we have the bandwidth to be able to do it. So we're happy to work with existing attorneys and consult on how the entrusted planning would actually operate within somebody's estate plan. So that's what our discovery process is, kind of the second one, which we call entrusted planning. And our facilitator, Tina, she can run a client through in a number of different levels, anywhere from flying out and meeting with the family and spending a weekend, taking them through discovery processes. Families will fly in and meet with us, but she'll sit down, she'll play rivets. We have an online diagnostic tool that everybody fills out before they come in to get a real good idea of sort of what the family understanding of all of these issues are. And that way Tina knows where to concentrate on. And then you start down the process of discovery. And by the time you're done, everybody is absolutely clear on every family member's 5 core values, the family as a whole 5 core values, and then action steps. That's where we would come back in and make recommendations and say, hey, look, your estate planning that was done a couple of years ago looks good from a basic standpoint, but this is where it fails to address what you guys as a family actually want to accomplish. So we have a number of resources that we can help on that.
What I hear in this whole process, Andrew, is we're very like-minded in our approach to wealth. Like you've mentioned that you have to have the North Star, right? You have to have the place, the why, and the end game of the entire estate planning process. That's how we think about wealth at Wealth Without Wall Street, right? If we don't know what the goals and objectives of the family are, then really infinite banking or any of the other resources and things of the 5 pillars of Wealth Without Wall Street really don't matter. They're just tools that if they're not used properly, if we don't know where we're headed, it doesn't matter. So that's why we do our first initial calls with anybody. We're going through those goals and the reality of those goals happening. The second part that I heard you say is that you have to have foundational things in place. And we talk about that with the hierarchy of wealth. Like if you don't have cash and cash value in place, then really your investing doesn't take place. And you have to have that baseline. And of course, we're using life insurance as that basis. So we're also protecting it at the same time. So
I'm a huge believer of that. I've got a lot of insurance on my life. I borrow from cash value. I get life insurance on my kids. I take it back. I'll tell you a horror story. So my 2 boys, happy, healthy boys and so forth, and we got life insurance on them, and we're great that we did. My daughter, who is my favorite, and it's not, I know you're not supposed to say that, but she's the only one of the 3 that isn't for sale, and the boys' price is going down by the day. You ought to short them and you'll make a bunch of money, right? But with her, she actually wound up having 2 seizures in 1 year, and that means she's diagnosed epileptic, and I couldn't get her insured. And we had to wait a couple of years, and happy to say she's been epileptic or seizure free. So she's now no longer epileptic, but I implemented that insurance as soon as I possibly could, because I want to make sure she always has that insurability. Plus, again, people talk about this as the Rockefeller method, where, the Rockefellers buy life insurance on every member of the family. Again, you guys, this is really more the Rothschild method. But the idea behind the Rothschilds is they view the family as a business. And I know that sounds kind of callous, but it really is a business. And every member of that family is a business asset that a lot of investment has been made into, with education and helping them start businesses, whatever it might be. And if that family member dies, who's supposed to carry on this Rockefeller legacy, well, they have lost a significant investment. So that life insurance death benefit will come back into the family and at least recoup them in an economic way to a certain degree. And that financial wealth is now perpetuating on through multiple generations. So, and then if you think about that and how that factors into what we're talking about here, it makes the legacy function for next generations. I mean, money is important. It makes all of this stuff work, and it's got to be there in order to do so. The question is, how is it being used?
That's right. Yeah. Money's just a medium of exchange, and the wealth is in the goods and services, the human capital that we bring to the table. And we were really blessed to have you on the show. Thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing this. It sounds like we're going to have you come back on and talk a little bit more about this Riveted. I want to hear about the new book, and eager to go out and get that. So definitely the two books that Andrew has written, we are encouraging you to go read: Entrusted and Riveted. These are assets that I think will help you in your goal and objective to build a legacy and to do one based upon your own core values and not some outdated, modern, static process. One last time, Andrew, how could our audience reach out to you and touch base with you if they want to talk more about these sort of things?
So a couple other things on the book, just so everybody's aware. I don't know about you guys, but I'm reading all day long. And the last thing I like to do is pick up another book at home and read it. So they're both on Audible too, just so everybody's aware. The first book, Entrusted, unfortunately for everybody listening, is read by me. So you have to listen to my horrible voice for 4.5 hours. The other book, Riveted, though, we had read by a client of mine that's an Emmy Award-winning voice actress, and she did a fantastic job. So she's actually pleasant to listen to. In terms of getting a hold of us, the best thing is just write me. It's a corny email, but it goes to my entire team. It's teamandrew@yorkhowell.com, and that's YORKHOWELL.com.
Well, we thank you. We hope families will discover more about what their goals and objectives are through this process, and hopefully be prepared to leave the next generation in a place that enhances them, but not prohibits them from, taking action and being productive in life. So thank you again, Andrew, for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, you guys. It's really a pleasure.
This has been the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show to break free of the Wall Street mindset and begin building wealth on your own terms in places you understand so that your wealth will never run dry. See you next episode.